Okay, so you guys are really into this whole Bermuda Triangle thing, huh? We got a mountain of stuff from you, articles, books, even some excerpts, I think. And it seems like you want to go beyond just the spooky stories, right? You want to get into what the evidence actually says.
Yeah.
So let's dive in.
Yeah, it is interesting. One of the first things that kind of jumps out from all this material is just how big the Bermuda Triangle is. We're not talking about a tiny little spot in the ocean.
Yeah, it's not like some little, uh, hidden corner where ships just vanish. It's a huge area,
Mhm.
right in the middle of major shipping lanes.
Exactly. And, when you think about it that way, statistically, you'd almost expect more incidents to happen in a busy area like that, right? Just because there's more traffic.
That's a really good point. It's funny how the myth makes it seem like this isolated danger zone, but it's a very well-traveled part of the ocean.
And that's where this idea of market biases comes in, which a lot of the sources talk about. Sensationalism sells. So a headline about a ship disappearing into thin air is going to get way more clicks than, boat has engine trouble.
So you're saying the Bermuda Triangle myth is basically just good marketing.
In a way, yeah. I mean, think about it. This happens all the time, right? News headlines, social media, even just the way we talk about things.
Mm.
The more dramatic or shocking a story is, the more attention it gets, even if it's not the whole truth.
Wow. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like we're kind of programmed to be drawn to the mysterious and the unexplained.
Totally. And then when you have authors and publishers who are kind of playing into that, well, no wonder a myth like this takes hold.
Well, speaking of dramatic stories, some of these headlines we got are pretty wild. I mean, we've got lost cities, alien encounters, holes in the sky. It's like a sci-fi movie.
Right. And that's where you got to use that critical thinking, because none of these claims, when you look at the actual evidence, none of it really holds up. And a lot of times these wilder theories come from sources that have a history of pushing paranormal stuff, not science.
Makes you wonder if it's just more fun to believe in the crazy theories than to accept that sometimes things just happen and we don't have all the answers.
Maybe. There's something to that, for sure. I mean, the ocean's massive, powerful, and there's still so much we don't know. But that doesn't mean we jump straight to the supernatural.
Okay, so let's move away from the fantastical stuff for a sec and talk about some of the real factors that could be at play here. And our sources mentioned some pretty intense weather that's common in the Bermuda Triangle area.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Hurricanes, rogue waves, water spouts. These are forces of nature that can be incredibly destructive even for modern ships.
I remember learning about rogue waves. Those are the ones that just appear out of nowhere, right?
Exactly. And they can be incredibly unpredictable and powerful. Even a relatively small boat can be overwhelmed by a rogue wave,
Mm.
especially if they're not expecting it. There's an example here, the sinking of the Pride of Baltimore. Beautiful sailing ship lost due to what they call a microburst.
So what exactly is a microburst?
Basically, it's like a localized column of sinking air within a thunderstorm. So imagine a sudden, incredibly powerful downdraft of wind, like a tiny hurricane hitting a very specific spot. It can create really dangerous conditions for ships and planes.
Wow. Okay, that sounds terrifying. So no mystical vortex sucking ships down, just the raw power of nature. It really puts things in perspective.
For sure. And these natural phenomena are things that we can sometimes forget about when we get caught up in all the more fantastical explanations.
Right, but it's not just nature, is it? The sources also talk about human error playing a role in some of these incidents.
Hmm.
And one of the most famous cases, Flight 19, really highlights that. That was the group of 5 Navy bombers that disappeared in 1945.
Bro, yeah, during a training mission. And what's so interesting about this case is that the leader of the squadron, he started reporting compass problems and seemed to get really disoriented.
So is it possible that they just got lost?
It's definitely a possibility.
Right.
Their radio transmissions are confusing. They're clearly struggling to figure out where they are. And remember, this was before GPS or any of those fancy navigation systems.
And they just vanished. No trace, no wreckage.
Right. And that, of course, is what fuels all the speculation. But when you look at it objectively, it's a classic case of how human error, especially under pressure, can lead to tragedy.
Even for experienced pilots. It really makes you think how much we rely on clear thinking and good judgment, especially in those challenging environments like the open ocean or up in the air. But wait, I remember something about a theory with methane, something about bubbles.
Ah, yes, the methane hydrate theory. This is where things get a bit more scientifically interesting.
Okay, so tell me more about this. How could methane bubbles cause ships to sink?
So methane hydrates are like these ice-like structures. They form on the ocean floor and they trap huge amounts of methane gas. Under certain conditions, these hydrates can become unstable and release the gas. And when that happens, It can reduce the density of the water significantly, so much that it's hard for ships to stay afloat.
So you're saying ships could be sinking because the water beneath them basically turns into a giant bubble bath.
Haha. It's a simplification, but
Right.
you're getting the idea. It's a fascinating theory, and it's actually been demonstrated in smaller scale experiments.
Wow, science can be pretty wild. But this is still just a theory, right?
Right.
We don't actually know if this has happened on a scale large enough to sink ships in the Bermuda Triangle.
That's right. It's a promising area of research, but we need to learn a lot more. And even if it's proven, it might not explain all the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. There could be multiple factors at play.
Okay, so we've got powerful weather, human error, and maybe even exploding bubbles. What about all those ships that supposedly just went missing, never to be seen again? That's got to be evidence of something more mysterious, right?
So before we jump to conclusions, there's a crucial piece of information we need to consider. And that brings us to Lloyd's of London.
Lloyd's of London. What do they have to do with the Bermuda Triangle?
They're one of the world's largest insurance markets. They've been insuring ships and cargo for centuries.
Right.
And here's the thing, Lloyd's of London has stated publicly that the Bermuda Triangle is not statistically more dangerous than any other busy shipping route.
Hold on. So if the people who are literally in the business of assessing risk aren't worried about the Bermuda Triangle, doesn't that tell us something?
It certainly suggests that the reality might be very different from the myth.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But before we move on, let's do a quick myth-busting round. Our sources mentioned all kinds of crazy theories about the Bermuda Triangle. Atlantis, time warps, holes in the sky. Where do these ideas even come from?
Well, as we've said, sensationalism plays a big role. But let's break down a few of these. The idea of Atlantis being connected to the Bermuda Triangle, pure speculation, no credible evidence at all.
What about time warps? Those are always popular in sci-fi.
Yeah, but again, there's zero scientific basis for time warps existing, let alone happening in the Bermuda Triangle.
Okay, and those holes in the sky. I thought I heard something about magnetic anomalies.
Right, so magnetic anomalies do exist, but they're not some kind of portal to another dimension. They're just variations in the Earth's magnetic field, and navigators know how to deal with them.
So if the Bermuda Triangle was really a magnetic death trap, wouldn't we have figured that out by now?
Exactly. Ships and planes have been crossing the Bermuda Triangle for centuries. And while there have been incidents, there's nothing to suggest they happen any more often than in other parts of the ocean.
Okay, what about the Bimini Road? Some people think that's proof of Atlantis, right?
Nope. Geologists have studied the Bimini Road extensively. It's a natural rock formation, nothing more.
All right, so we've debunked a few of the more outlandish claims. I'm guessing there's still some genuine mysteries about the Bermuda Triangle, though. Cases that even the experts can't explain.
Oh, absolutely. There are. And those are the ones that really keep us coming back.
Well, let's hear about those then. Give me the details on some of those unsolved mysteries.
You know, when we talk about those unexplained incidents, one that really sticks out is the case of the USS Cyclops.
Oh, the Cyclops.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a huge Navy cargo ship? Disappeared back in 1918, I think.
That's right. Yeah, over 300 people on board vanished without a trace while sailing from the West Indies to Baltimore. It's one of the biggest losses of life connected to the Bermuda Triangle, and it really kind of cemented that whole spooky reputation.
300 people.
That's
Just, I mean, it's hard to imagine what those families must have gone through, not knowing what happened.
Absolutely. And you got to remember the historical context, too. This was during World War I.
So there could have been other things going on besides just the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle.
Exactly. German U-boats were active in the Atlantic, and the Cyclops was carrying a cargo of manganese ore, which was a crucial war material.
So it could have been attacked.
It's definitely possible. They never found the wreckage. But historians have come up with different theories. A U-boat attack, a storm, maybe even structural problems with the ship itself. Apparently, the Cyclops had some design flaws that made it prone to rolling.
So maybe a perfect storm of factors, literally all made worse by the wartime conditions.
That's probably what happened. And it's interesting how quickly this incident, whatever the real cause was, got sucked into that whole Bermuda Triangle narrative.
It seems like throughout the 20th century, there was this growing fascination with the paranormal and all these unexplained things. And the Bermuda Triangle was the perfect place for those stories.
For sure, authors like Charles Berlitz and Richard Weiner, they wrote these books that explicitly tied the Bermuda Triangle to stuff like Atlantis UFOs, even time travel.
So instead of looking at the plausible explanations, whether human error, mechanical failures, they went for the more sensational stuff, the stuff that sells books.
Yep. And it worked. It's a perfect example of how the market, the drive to publish what sells regardless of whether it's true, can shape how people understand the world.
It's crazy how a few popular books can have that much influence. But let's jump ahead a bit. Flight 19 that we talked about earlier happened in 45. And then just a few years later, there were a couple of incidents that really kind of put the Bermuda Triangle on the map.
You're talking about those star incidents, the disappearances of the Star Tiger and Star Ariel?
Yes, those were both passenger planes, right?
Yeah.
Vanished in the late 40s.
That's right. Both Tudor the Fourth aircraft flying between Bermuda and Jamaica, Star Tiger went missing in January 1948, and the Star Ariel vanished almost exactly a year later. These cases really ramped up the fear of the Bermuda Triangle, especially for air travel.
And those flights were right in the middle of that supposed danger zone.
Oh, yeah.
What were the circumstances like when they disappeared?
Well, both flights were dealing with some rough weather. And remember, aviation technology back then wasn't nearly as advanced as it is now. Navigation was less reliable, and planes were more prone to mechanical problems.
So are you saying these were just tragic accidents, not some supernatural force at work?
That's what the investigations concluded. They never found any wreckage from either plane. But the most likely explanation is that it was a combination of things. Mechanical failure, pilot error, bad weather.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even with all our fancy tech, nature can still be pretty unforgiving. But speaking of the Bermuda Triangle itself, one thing I noticed in the research is how much the boundaries of this so-called danger zone have shifted over time.
That's a great observation. It's like the Bermuda Triangle is this shape-shifting glob. In some stories, it's tiny. In others, it takes up half the Atlantic.
So is the Bermuda Triangle even a real place with defined borders? Or is it just kind of this idea that people have slapped onto a random part of the ocean?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, the answer is kind of murky. If you look at those early articles and books about the Bermuda Triangle, you'll find that they describe its boundaries in all sorts of different ways.
So depending on who you ask, the Bermuda Triangle could be practically anywhere between Florida and Puerto Rico. No wonder it's hard to figure out the truth.
Right. This lack of a clear definition makes it practically impossible to collect any reliable statistics about how many incidents have really happened in this supposed danger zone.
And it makes it easy to cherry pick the cases that fit the narrative right. If you want to make the Bermuda Triangle seem super scary, just expand the boundaries to include a bunch more shipwrecks and disappearances.
Totally. It's classic selective storytelling. You get a distorted picture of reality. And this is something to keep in mind, not just for the Bermuda Triangle, but for any kind of information we encounter.
So shifting boundaries, sensationalism, a focus on the spooky over the scientific credits. What are some other ways that this myth has been kept alive?
Well, one thing our sources point out is how some of these accounts, they downplay or even completely ignore the role of weather.
Like, they'll talk about a ship vanishing, but not mention that there was a hurricane going on at the same time.
Precisely. Or they might blame a sinking on unknown forces while conveniently forgetting to mention that the area is notorious for rogue waves.
It's like they're leaving out crucial information on purpose to make the story more mysterious.
It's definitely a pattern you see when you look at how the Bermuda Triangle has been portrayed over time.
But what about the research? Haven't there been serious investigations into the Bermuda Triangle?
There have been, but even in the research, you find examples of what you might call sloppy science, using incomplete data, exaggerating numbers to make the triangle seem more dangerous, even just failing to check basic facts.
So bad data exaggeration, omission of key details, sounds like the perfect recipe for a good myth.
Pretty much. And this is where critical thinking is so important. It's not about dismissing everything about the Bermuda Triangle as bogus. It's about approaching the information with a healthy dose of skepticism, looking for solid evidence, and considering different perspectives.
We need to be more like Lloyd's of London. Those insurance folks who don't buy into the hype, they're looking at the data, not the drama.
Exactly. And that's the mindset we should all try to have, whether we're investigating the Bermuda Triangle or just trying to understand the world around us.
Okay, so we've debunked some myths, talked about the role of sensationalism and bad data, but there's still that question. Are there ANY truly unexplained incidents in the Bermuda Triangle? Cases that even the biggest skeptics can't fully explain.
You know what? There are, and those are the cases that keep us fascinated.
All right, let's hear about them then. What are some of these unsolved mysteries?
All right, so let's dive into some of these really strange cases that have kind of fueled that whole Bermuda Triangle legend. And one that really jumped out at me in the research was the disappearance of the NC-16002.
Oh yeah, the NC-16002? That was a DC-3 passenger plane.
Right.
Vanished on its way from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami back in December 48?
Yeah, December of 48. And this case is still a head-scratcher for investigators.
What makes this case so different from all the others we've talked about? It seems like there were a lot of planes and ships disappearing around that time.
Well, there are a few things that make this one particularly weird. For one, the weather at the time was apparently pretty good. No major storms in the area.
So we could probably rule out a sudden storm or a hurricane taking the plane down.
Yeah, that seems unlikely. And there were some minor mechanical issues reported before takeoff, but nothing that should have caused a major failure.
And they never found any wreckage. Not a single piece.
Nope. Despite a ton of searching, no trace of the NC-16002 or any of the passengers was ever found. And then there's the radio transmissions from the flight. That adds a whole other layer of mystery.
Oh. What was so strange about the radio transmissions?
Well, the pilot, Captain Robert Lindquist, he stayed super calm throughout the whole flight, even when he was reporting that they were low on fuel and having trouble keeping altitude.
It's almost like he didn't realize how serious the situation was.
Yeah, it's a little eerie. So what happened? We don't know for sure. Some experts think maybe there was a massive mechanical failure, something that just wasn't detected before takeoff and it happened suddenly. Others think maybe there was some kind of crazy weather event that wasn't picked up by radar, like a microburst or even a rogue wave. But without the wreckage, it's all just guessing.
It's kind of wild to think that even now, with all our technology, we still have these incidents that we just can't explain. It's like there's a piece missing from the puzzle.
And that's what keeps drawing us back to these mysteries, isn't it? Trying to understand, trying to find that missing piece.
For sure. Speaking of mysteries, there's another case that came up in our research that I found really fascinating, a little creepy. The case of the Connemara V.
Oh, yeah. The ghost ship.
Yeah.
Classic maritime mystery right there.
Okay, so give me the rundown. What happened to the Connemara V?
So it was September of 1955. The Connemara IV, a 50-foot ketch, was found drifting in the Atlantic south of Bermuda. And get this, the boat itself was in perfect condition. No damage, no signs of a struggle or anything.
Okay, but where was the crew?
Gone.
Vanished.
Wait, what? Just like that. What are the theories about what happened to them?
Well, at first people thought maybe a freak weather event like a rogue wave hit and swept everyone overboard. But the fact that the yacht was totally fine makes that less likely.
You'd think a wave strong enough to take out a whole crew would at least leave a dent or something. So what else could it be?
Some people have said maybe the crew abandoned ship for some reason. But if that's what happened, why didn't they take the lifeboat? It was still there in perfect condition.
Did they find anything on board that might give a clue?
Not really. Even the table was set for a meal. Like they just disappeared in the middle of dinner.
Okay, now that's creepy. It's like something out of a ghost story.
Pirates. Mutiny. Alien abduction.
Haha. All those ideas have been thrown around, but none of them really fit the facts. Pirates doesn't make sense because there's no sign of a fight or anything being stolen. Mutiny doesn't explain the lifeboat. And, well, let's just say there's no hard evidence for aliens.
So we're left with a true mystery. A whole crew gone without a trace in a perfectly good boat. It really feeds into that whole mystique of the Bermuda Triangle.
It does. And it reminds us that even with all our technology and science, there are still things that happen in the world that we just can't explain.
Yeah, and maybe that's okay. Maybe a little mystery is good for the soul. But it's important to remember that just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it has to be supernatural.
Exactly. We need to use our heads, especially with stuff like the Bermuda Triangle. Question what we're told, look for evidence, and consider all sides of the story.
Couldn't agree more. That's a great takeaway from this whole deep dive, I think. We've looked at the history of the Bermuda Triangle, we've busted some myths, and we've dug into some seriously strange cases. But in the end, it's up to each of us to decide what we believe.
Absolutely. And to do that with a healthy dose of skepticism and an open mind.
Well put. So to our listener, thanks for sending us down this rabbit hole of Bermuda Triangle mysteries. We hope this deep dive gave you some new perspectives and maybe even sparked some new questions.
And remember, whether you're exploring the depths of the ocean or just trying to make sense of the world around you, keep that critical thinking cap on. There's a whole world of amazing stuff out there just waiting to be discovered.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.